Welcome everyone to the first OMR Architecture Meeting in 2023. Hope everyone had a good holiday and ready to start 2023 off right. As is sort of an annual tradition for us, we like to take the opportunity at the beginning of the year to look back at what the project was able to accomplish the previous year, so in 2022 in this case, and what some of our objectives are as we see them in January for the project this year. So I'd like to take you all through some of that. So just a summary. So we've had a number of things happen last year. There's about 438 pull requests that were merged in the project. This is comparable to the previous year, so we're holding steady there. In terms of the changes in the code, you know, we're up about 25,000 lines of code than we were earlier this year. So there is a fair number of new changes coming, and refactoring also occurring there as well, as reflected in some of those numbers. So a lot of good things happening there. And in total, right now, we're about 951,000 lines of code. That includes comments as well. So we're slowly increasing there. In terms of the contributions that are being made, we're fairly consistent throughout the year. I think, you know, in large part, this is because of the requirements in OMR that are feeding into the OpenJ9 project, which is the largest consumer of OMR at this point. So, but a lot of the changes that are being made in OMR are really general and apply to other language environments as well, which is the goal of the OMR project. From a component point of view, much of the activity and much of the contributions have been in the compiler component. I mean, I think that it's just reflective of the way that some of the code has been refactored and how it's being used. But it's also good to see here that a fair number of contributions have been made to the testing side as well. And so these are tests that are being executed on every CI run that occurs before we merge a PR. So I'm glad to see that there is a focus and a continued focus on testing and quality with a lot of these changes. And then there's a variety of other changes that have occurred in other components throughout the year. We had one new committer elected to the project, Babneet Singh, and a new project lead, myself, was elected as well earlier last year. So that's sort of the dashboard view. Drilling down into some of the components, like I said, the compiler had most of the activity last year. A lot of the work was done there was a lot of work done in the code generator last year on each architecture to support SIMD instructions. This isn't to say that there wasn't SIMD support there before in some platforms, but in 2021 and into 2022, we really started to make an effort to clean up a lot of this code, make it work better, make it more consistent and easily to understand. If you recall, we used to have, well, there were a lot of different ways of representing vector in the IL in the compiler, and Git Equivalence went and proposed a new design for the IL, and you know, we had gone and implemented that last year, along with data types and a whole bunch of trill tests to go along with to test that. And at the lower level, we really rounded out a lot of the support needed to support those new IL opcodes in the various backends. I know Z and Power had a lot of that to begin with, but two architectures in particular were kind of starting from scratch. AArch64 really didn't have support for vector at all, and We've built up a fair bit of support in 2022, more to come, but a lot of it was built up from scratch. And on the x86 side, even though it's a fairly old platform that had support for vector in the past, it really didn't support any of the newer vector. And when I say newer, I mean like from 10 years ago, the newer Intel AVX, AVX2 or AVX 512 instructions for various vector lengths. So a fair bit of refactoring had to go into the back end there in order to support those new vector lengths. So this is all still work in progress. I mean, a lot of that code is on all these architectures is laid down and it's there, and it's available for use. So it's great to see. The main driver behind a lot of this work was the vector API in the coming vector API in Java, and it is exploited by all these instructions are being exploited by by code in OpenJ9 to map the vector API directly down to various machine instructions. The other thing that we did this year is support Apple Silicon. This isn't actually just a compiler statement. There were changes that needed to be made in the compiler to support Apple Silicon, but the more general support story needed to happen in the port library and also just in our CI pipelines as well. We actually have a macOS machine there that is used as part of our testing. A few months back, Devin demonstrated some of the work that he was doing on a scratch memory analysis tool to try and identify where memory is being consumed in the JIT, and really to drill down and try to understand what and why bits of memory are being allocated. So I think that was a good demo, and I think there's some fairly promising tooling coming there that will help us to reduce the overall footprint and in many cases improve the performance of some of these optimizations and some of the compilations that are occurring. So that's some promising stuff that's coming. Technical debt and cleanup is always an important part of the compiler, just owing to the history of it. And there were a number of changes made last year to move us along that trajectory toward a much cleaner implementation, improving conceptual integrity, more code comments, things like that. So a lot of good stuff happening there. There was also a number of documents contributed to the OMR project on various technical topics, primarily around describing various aspects of the compiler. So this includes things like various optimizations. There were concepts and IL, things like that were a lot of these things came from discussions that were happening in various issues, and at one point we decided, well, that'll be a great thing to document somewhere so that someone will know about this next time. So we would create a snippet of documentation for that. But it wasn't just like a few words. People did put some polish into this as well, and I think it's a good step forward last year, and definitely one that we want to continue going forward. Mark made progress on JIT Builder 2 as well. So I think that I know he's talked about that a couple of times last year to give us updates on his progress, and it looks like things are moving forward. And as we'll see, I think that we'll hopefully land that into the code base sometime this year. And the other thing that has happened in the compiler is more changes to make it more extensible. I mean, the way that it was designed in the first place was to allow other consuming projects to extend it in certain places in order to allow them to use the technology. We did make some enhancements in that regard last year. There are other projects that are where consumption of OMR is in the works, and there were some changes that needed to be made to a variety of the classes to make that easier. It's certainly the case that the way that the code is right now is not the final state in terms of the way that it can be made extensible. And obviously, as another project comes along and finds parts of the code that are difficult to extend, we need to accommodate that. So I'm glad to see that we're pushing on some of those things, and some of those changes were contributed, and there's certainly more to come there. Looking at other components, Babneet contributed a lot of the C group v2 support in the port library. So we did a fairly thorough job with that, getting that in and getting it well tested. And as part of that work, he also thought about ways of, different ways of testing some of the code that we have for that, and being able to run tests in Docker containers, that sort of thing, and changing the syntax on the CI triggers so that you can, for example, you can add debug variable settings and things like that you can get passed into your build. So all in all, making it a much more useful experience when you want to do testing in the project. I've already mentioned Apple Silicon support. This is really just sort of completing that and saying that we needed to do more on the CI side. And everyone's favorite, finally, we did automatic copyright verification on commit. So thanks for Devin for pushing that one along. There might be more to come on that one this year. So looking forward for this year, there's a number of things that we want to, that we expect to see happen this year. So a few years ago, so this is an Eclipse Foundation project, and a few years ago, I believe it was 2019, OMR did its first release. So as it stands right now, OMR is an incubator project, and it will remain an incubator project until we start doing releases and eventually come out of the incubation phase. So basically roll our versions over to 1.0. We're probably a long way from that, in that we don't even do releases right now. But in 2019, we did start that process, and we did do one release. Yay. So 0.1. So we will be resuming and starting a release cadence this year. I mentioned before that there are consumers of OMR that are coming along, and they would benefit from a regular release cadence from OMR. So a snapshot version of the code that they can standardize on, and they can stabilize and go forward with that. Details here. This is not something that is necessarily easy to define. I know last time we did a release, we had a fair bit of discussion around what the right cadence is, what components are we going to be including in the release, what does the API, what does the release API look like, all those sorts of things. So I would imagine over the coming months, we're going to be having some discussions around releases and when we can do them and how they're going to look and their frequency and all those sorts of things. But suffice it to say, I think it's time and expected of the project to do releases, and we're going to be starting those up this year again. Kind of related to that, as more projects are consuming OMR, the code needs to continue to be made more extensible and making it easier to extend things in certain places. So this isn't just about, for example, making let's say classes more extensible in the compiler. It's also about maybe adding some tooling to check whether or not things are being extended in the right way or to protect the API, that kind of thing. So that really leads into the next point about the compiler API and figuring out. So that is perhaps the largest component that is, well, let me go back one more step. When we released in 2019, the compiler API was not part of that release. We protected the GC API and the port library API and probably another one there, but we really need to decide on what is it that we're going to be, standardizing as part of the release. And the compiler API is certainly one of those things that is the people are looking for. So we probably do want to make some progress there, but to help us define some of that, there are things that we can do from a, let's say, from a tooling point of view, or even from a tooling point of view, in order to enforce some of the decisions around the API in terms of how classes are extended and what's allowed to be changed, that sort of thing. The compiler API, if you're not familiar with it, is certainly one of the more complex areas of OMR, and it's got a very wide surface area at this point with lots of things that can possibly change and lots of dependencies and that kind of thing. So we really do need to make progress on reining that in, especially as more projects come in the future. There is work needing to happen, ongoing work to complete the SIMD support. This is primarily in the compiler. There's IL work coming, and there's more code generator work coming to support different kinds of SIMD instructions. So expect those to be dropping steadily over the next several months. The whole effort to improve documentation needs to continue as well. I know that from an IBM perspective, internally, there's a number of documents that have been found that can be contributed to the project. They need to be cleaned up and modernized and contributed. So we have some enthusiasm around that, and we have some people that are very motivated into doing that, which is terrific. Mark plans to integrate JIT Builder 2.0 this year. Like I said, he's been making progress on that. I think he's going to keep us up to date on that as it progresses this year. But I think no one should be surprised if they see a pull request for that coming in the coming months. Another thing that would like to do, to start a discussion on at least, is to look at the dependencies that OMR has on third-party libraries, mainly for portability reasons. And one of the areas that we've already encountered some issues with on some projects is with the use of STL and some of the challenges that has in terms of being able to find the right version of STL on a certain machine, that kind of thing. So we really do want to look at our dependency on C++ STL containers. And when I say, our dependency, I'm looking at you, compiler. So it's really the compiler that uses STL containers. Historically, that technology hasn't used C++ STL containers. They grew its own set of data structures to do things, and the advantage of that was they were very carefully constructed. They had very good memory characteristics, and they were very well understood. But they didn't have the versatility, let's say, as some of the STL containers. But anyway, I don't want to go into that whole topic right now, but at some point in the near future, I think we're going to bring up a topic where we can start to talk again about our dependency on the STL containers and what we want to do about that. If that is the strategic solution we want to go with, how can we mitigate some of the problems that people are having? If it isn't the strategic solution, what are our options? Do we want to, for example, re-implement some of the ones that we are using, that kind of thing? But that'll be a discussion for another architecture meeting in the future. We also have a number of epics that people have created as they've started to look at parts of the code to try and understand how to refactor it to make it better, or to make it, well, just generally reduce technical debt. There could be code in there that no longer works, or it no longer exists, or is no longer needed, or there's duplicate code, that sort of thing. We have very large high-level ideas, but in order for newer people on the project to come on and start working on some of these things, they really have to be broken down into smaller tasks. This is a bullet point that I think has appeared on the last 2 or 3, and I think it's still an ongoing goal for us to break work down into smaller pieces, into beginner items that that people can take and start working on. So that's something that we want to continue doing going forward. So this is a fairly quick overview of what, as of January, what we see coming down the pipe in 2023. Certainly happy to have any discussions on any of these, either now or in a future architecture meeting. But I'll stop there for now and see if anybody has any questions or comments, that sort of thing.
Hi, sorry, I'm just curious, who's having problems with the STL in 2023?
Well, I mean, some of the groups that we've worked with, and some of the build environments that they have, they can be older, and they may not work as well with some of the technology that we have. It's just a means of reducing the dependencies on that. The other thing about them as well is the use of templates and how hairy and how large the code can get in some cases.
Okay, so
licensing can be an issue, as well as how you integrate it together, and that can cause some versioning problems too. Like if you don't want the license, then you have to not include it, but then you have to make sure you get the right version at runtime when it runs, that sort of thing.
all right, so it's I guess in maybe some of these newer downstream projects that are starting to try to consume OMR, is it?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was curious about.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other thoughts, questions? Suggestions? No? Okay. So the meetings are going to resume on a regular cadence again. I may need to phase shift the meetings. I know I was hoping for 2 weeks starting today. I may need to phase shift that by a week to accommodate some that can't make this time slot regularly and who usually participate. So you might see that from me soon. I'll be polling a few people about that. Yeah. But if there are no other questions, we're going to pick it up in either 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I'm not sure which yet, but thanks everyone for your time, and hopefully we have a great 2023 here with the OMR project.
Thanks, Daryl. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.